The fluorescent lights of Fort Ridgeway's mess hall buzzed with the steady hum of a Friday evening. 200 soldiers filled the space, their conversations blending into a familiar symphony of clinking trays, scraping chairs, and the kind of laughter that only comes after a long week of training. It was 7:32 in the evening. The sun had already dipped below the Texas horizon, leaving behind a sky the color of bruised peaches. Inside the mess hall, no one paid attention to the sunset. They were too busy with their meals, their jokes, their weekend plans. No one noticed the small woman who slipped through the main entrance. She moved like a shadow, her footsteps making no sound against the concrete floor. Her oversized military jacket hung loosely on her frame, the sleeves rolled up twice to keep them from swallowing her hands. Beneath it, a fitted gray t-shirt and slim military pants that seemed borrowed from someone else's closet. Her name was Elena Mercer. She was 28 years old. She had long blonde hair tied in a messy bun, loose curls framing a face that belonged on a college campus, not a military installation. Her eyes were blue, almost impossibly blue, the kind of eyes that seemed too large for her delicate features. Among these battle-hardened soldiers, men and women who had seen combat, who knew violence intimately, she looked like a lost civilian who had wandered into a war zone. She looked like prey, and in exactly 18 minutes, she would shatter every assumption in that room. But first, she had to survive the trap she had walked into. Sergeant First Class Marcus Hayes spotted her from across the mess hall. He was sitting at the center table, surrounded by his usual entourage of soldiers who laughed at his jokes and agreed with his opinions. At 6 feet 4 inches, with muscles that strained against his camouflage uniform, Marcus was the kind of man who made other men feel smaller just by existing in the same space. He had served 3 tours in Iraq. He had medals he rarely talked about and scars he showed off at every opportunity. He had built his entire identity around being the alpha in every room he entered, and right now, his predator instincts were tingling. "Well, well, well," Marcus said, his voice cutting through the ambient noise like a blade through butter. He rose from his seat, his full height casting a shadow that seemed to stretch across the entire mess hall. "What do we have here?" The conversations around him began to die. One table at a time, soldiers noticed what Marcus was looking at. They followed his gaze to the small woman standing near the serving counter, clutching a paper napkin like it was a lifeline. "Military uniforms are just costumes for kids playing dress-up now, huh?" The words hit the room like a grenade. Every head turned. Every conversation stopped. 200 pairs of eyes locked onto Elena Mercer, and the weight of their attention was almost physical. She froze. Her porcelain skin flushed red as the scrutiny crashed over her like a wave. Her shoulders hunched forward in a posture that screamed vulnerability. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched that paper napkin even tighter. Marcus smiled. It was the smile of a wolf that had spotted a wounded deer. "Seriously," he continued, taking a step closer. Then another, then another. Each step was deliberate, designed to intimidate, to dominate. "Who authorized this little fashion show? This is a military installation, not some community theater production." Laughter erupted. It was harsh, immediate, cruel. The kind of laughter that comes from people who are relieved they are not the target. Phones materialized in hands like weapons, already recording what promised to be prime social media entertainment. Lieutenant Rachel Torres rose from her seat at Marcus's table. She was 32 years old with perfectly styled black hair that gleamed under the fluorescent lights. She had worked hard to become the most intimidating woman on base, and she guarded that position with the ferocity of a territorial predator. "Oh my God," Rachel said, her voice dripping with theatrical concern as she circled Elena like a shark. "Sweetie, are you lost? The costume party is probably at the community center downtown. You know, where civilians belong?" More laughter, more phones recording. Elena's response was barely audible, her voice soft and uncertain. I have orders to report here. Orders? Marcus's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. From who? Your mommy? Your drama teacher? He gestured broadly to his audience, playing to the crowd with practiced ease. Look at this, people. We've got ourselves a lost little princess wearing daddy's clothes. The mockery should have been devastating. Any normal person would have fled by now, tears streaming, dignity in tatters. But Elena simply stood there, absorbing each insult with an unnatural stillness that only the most observant would have recognized as something other than fear. In the corner booth near the emergency exit, a man lowered his newspaper just enough to observe the unfolding scene. Captain Nathan Cole was 45 years old, with a kind of forgettable face that made him perfect for his actual profession. He had been watching Elena Mercer for 3 months now, ever since Shadow Protocol had flagged her as a person of interest. His fingers moved imperceptibly beneath the table, activating the recording device concealed in his jacket. She was exactly where they expected her to be, doing exactly what they expected her to do. The trembling hands, the downcast eyes, the submissive posture, all perfectly calibrated to make her appear harmless. But Cole had learned long ago that the most dangerous predators were the ones that look like prey. He activated his encrypted phone and typed a brief message to his handlers. Target acquired, observing, will report. The response came instantly. Maintain surveillance. Do not engage until identity confirmed. Cole acknowledged the message and returned his attention to the scene unfolding before him. He had no idea that across the room, behind those trembling hands and downcast eyes, Elena Mercer was cataloging his position, his sight lines, and his communication patterns. He thought he was hunting her. He had no idea she had been hunting him since the day he arrived at Fort Ridgeway. Corporal Grant Sullivan decided to join the entertainment. He was a weapons specialist with arms like tree trunks and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite by someone who had never seen a human face before. He pushed back from his table and sauntered over to the growing circle of soldiers surrounding Elena. "Hey, princess," he called out, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "You know basic drill commands, right? Since you're wearing our uniform and all." The challenge hung in the air like smoke from a discharged weapon. Grant expected hesitation. He expected confusion. He expected tears. What he got instead made him take an involuntary step backward. "Yes, Corporal." Elena's voice was suddenly crisp and clear, like a switch had been flipped somewhere inside her. She snapped to attention with movements so precise, so perfectly executed, that the laughter began to falter. Her posture transformed from cowering civilian to textbook military bearing in the space of a heartbeat. Her spine straightened, her chin lifted. Her eyes focused on a point in the middle distance with the 1,000-yard stare of someone who had seen things that would make these soldiers weep. "About face," Grant commanded, certain he could trip her up. Elena executed the movement flawlessly. Her combat boots clicked against the concrete floor with parade ground precision. The timing was perfect. The execution was without flaw. "Present arms," Grant continued, his confidence wavering. Without hesitation, Elena brought her hands up in the exact position required for presenting an imaginary rifle. Her form was so perfect that it could have been used as a training demonstration at West Point. The casual chatter in the mess hall had stopped completely now. 200 soldiers watched in silence as this small woman performed drill commands with a precision that exceeded most of their own capabilities. Marcus sensed the shift in atmosphere and moved quickly to regain control. He was not about to let some civilian trick undermine his authority. "Lucky guess," he declared loudly, forcing confidence into his voice. "Anyone can memorize a few moves from YouTube videos, but let's see how you handle real equipment." He unholstered his sidearm, a Beretta M9 that had been his constant companion through 3 combat deployments. He ejected the magazine and cleared the chamber with theatrical flair, making sure everyone could see that the weapon was safe. Then he extended the empty pistol toward Elena. Field strip and reassemble. 30 seconds. It was meant to be an impossible challenge. Military weapons were complex precision instruments that took months of training to handle competently. The M9 alone had over 60 individual parts, and the average soldier needed at least 45 seconds to field strip it properly. No civilian could possibly do what he was asking. Elena looked at the weapon in his hands. Her eyes moved over its surface with the kind of intimate familiarity that comes from handling something thousands of times. Then she reached out and took it from him. What happened next would be replayed on phones across Fort Ridgeway for weeks to come. Her hands moved like liquid lightning. The weapon came apart in her grasp with a series of soft clicks and mechanical whispers that spoke of absolute familiarity. Spring, barrel, slide, frame. Each component was removed with surgical precision and laid out in perfect order on the nearby table. The watching soldiers leaned forward despite themselves, caught between disbelief and growing unease. 15 seconds. That was all it had taken her to completely disassemble a service pistol that many of them still struggled with after months of training. The reassembly was even more impressive. Her fingers moved without conscious thought, muscle memory guiding each motion as the weapon reformed in her hands. Click, snap, slide. The pieces flowed together like they were magnetized, finding their proper positions without hesitation or adjustment. In 12 seconds, the pistol was whole again. The action was smooth as silk as she tested the mechanism before safely returning it to Marcus. Total time, 27 seconds. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that comes when the world shifts on its axis, and everyone present knows they are witnessing something significant. Marcus stared at the weapon in his hands as if it might bite him. His confident smirk had been replaced by something approaching confusion. His mind was trying to process what he had just seen, trying to fit it into his worldview, where he was always the most competent person in any room. Rachel's mouth had fallen open, her practiced superiority momentarily shattered. Grant was frantically trying to remember if he had ever seen anyone, including weapons instructors with decades of experience, handle a pistol with that level of effortless competence. Beginner's luck, Marcus said finally, but his voice lacked conviction. Anyone can take apart a pistol if they've watched enough action movies. Elena said nothing. She simply returned to her previous position, hands clasped behind her back, eyes downcast, as if the last 30 seconds had never happened. But something had changed in the room. The predatory energy that had been building had shifted into something else. Uncertainty, curiosity, and for some, the first stirrings of fear. Private Jake Morrison felt that shift more acutely than most. He was 19 years old, barely 3 months out of basic training, still soft around the edges in ways that combat would eventually harden. But he came from a family where respect was earned through character, not intimidation. His grandfather, Gunnery Sergeant Robert Morrison, had fought at Iwo Jima. The old man had passed away 2 years ago, but his words still echoed in Jake's mind whenever he faced a difficult choice. The measure of a man is not how he treats those above him. It is how he treats those who cannot fight back. Jake watched Elena standing there, absorbing the hostility of 200 soldiers with quiet dignity. He watched Marcus circling her like a predator that sensed weakness, and something twisted uncomfortably in his stomach. This was wrong. Maybe we should just leave her alone, Jake said quietly, but his words carried in the sudden stillness of the mess hall, reaching ears that were hungry for any development in this unexpected drama. Marcus's head snapped around like a striking snake. His eyes found Jake, and they were not friendly. What was that, Private? Jake swallowed hard. He could feel the weight of 200 gazes shifting to him now, and the pressure was immense. Every instinct screamed at him to back down, to apologize, to preserve his career and his standing among his peers. But his grandfather's voice was louder than his fear. "I said maybe we should leave her alone, Sergeant. She's not bothering anyone." The temperature in the room seemed to drop by several degrees. Marcus took a step toward Jake, his massive frame blocking out the fluorescent lights and casting the younger soldier in shadow. "Oh, look at that," Rachel said, her smile turning predatory. "The newbie's got a crush on our little dress-up doll. How sweet." Laughter rippled through the crowd, but it was nervous laughter now. Everyone could sense the dangerous energy building between Marcus and Jake. "Private Morrison," Marcus said, his voice dangerously soft. "Your grandfather was a Marine, wasn't he? Iwo Jima?" Jake nodded, his chin lifting slightly. "Yes, Sergeant." "Then he'd be ashamed to see you defending some civilian playing dress-up. Get back in line." The insult hit Jake like a physical blow. His grandfather's memory was sacred to him, and having it used as a weapon felt like desecration. But before he could respond, before he could do something that would probably end his military career before it had truly begun, something unexpected happened. Elena looked up. For just a moment, her eyes met Jake's, and he saw something there that made his breath catch in his throat. It was not gratitude. It was not relief. It was something ancient and weary, a kind of recognition that suggested she had seen this scenario play out countless times before, and she knew exactly how it would end. "It's fine," Elena said softly, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "The private was just trying to help. I appreciate his concern." Marcus turned back to her, his predator instincts momentarily confused by her response. She was supposed to cower. She was supposed to flee. She was not supposed to diffuse situations with quiet dignity. "Well," he said, forcing his confident smile back onto his face, "at least someone here has manners, unlike our young Private Morrison, who apparently thinks he knows better than his superiors." The threat was clear. Jake had marked himself as a target. His life at Fort Ridgeway had just become significantly more difficult. But when Elena looked at him again, there was something in her eyes that almost looked like approval. And somehow, that made everything worth it. Colonel David Warren chose that moment to enter the mess hall. He was 61 years old with a weathered face that bore the marks of 3 decades of military service. He had commanded troops in the Gulf War, in Kosovo, in places whose names were still classified. He had the kind of situational awareness that came from a lifetime of making decisions that meant life or death for the men and women under his command. He immediately noticed the crowd formation, the cell phones, the palpable tension radiating from the center of the room. His experienced eyes swept across the scene, cataloging details with the automatic precision of a career officer. "What's the situation here?" Warren's voice cut through the noise like a blade, carrying 30 years of command authority. Marcus snapped to attention, but his smile remained. "Just conducting an impromptu inspection, sir. Checking to make sure personnel are properly authorized to wear military uniforms on base." Warren's gaze moved to Elena, taking in her oversized jacket, her civilian clothes beneath, her obvious discomfort. To his experienced eyes, she looked like exactly what Marcus claimed. A confused civilian who had somehow ended up in the wrong place at the wrong time. But there was something else. Something in the way she held herself. Something in the steadiness of her breathing despite the hostile attention. Something that did not quite fit. "Ma'am," Warren said, his voice not unkind but carrying the weight of official inquiry, "do you have proper authorization to be on this installation?" Elena reached into her jacket pocket with movements so careful they seemed choreographed. She produced a slightly crumpled set of papers and extended them toward the colonel. "Yes, sir. Orders to report for temporary duty assignment." Warren accepted the documents, his expression growing increasingly puzzled as he read. The orders appeared legitimate, bearing all the correct signatures and authorization codes, but the assignment details were vague, the reporting structure unclear. It was the kind of paperwork that raised more questions than it answered. These orders are unusual, Warren said slowly, his military mind automatically flagging inconsistencies. The authorization codes are correct, but the assignment parameters are classified above my clearance level. Marcus's confidence flickered for the first time since the confrontation began. In his experience, confused civilians did not carry classified military orders with authorization codes that stumped full colonels. "Sir," Rachel interjected, sensing Marcus's uncertainty and moving to support him. "With respect, those documents could be forgeries. Identity theft is a serious problem these days, and military credentials are valuable on the black market." It was a reasonable concern, and Warren nodded slowly. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to verify these orders through proper channels. Until then, I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to remain here under supervision." Elena simply nodded, her compliance so complete that it seemed almost rehearsed. In the corner booth, Captain Cole had heard enough. He activated his phone one final time, sending a message that would set events in motion far beyond the walls of this mess hall. Target confirmed on base. Orders appear legitimate but classified. Recommend continued surveillance and preparation for extraction if necessary. The response came within seconds. Acknowledged. Maintain position. Backup en route. Whatever Elena Mercer really was, Shadow Protocol was about to find out, and they had no idea that they were walking into a trap that had been 3 months in the making. Marcus Hayes was not ready to surrender his evening's entertainment. The mystery of Elena's orders only made him more determined to expose her as a fraud. In his mind, there was no way a woman who looked like she belonged in a college sorority could possess any real military skills. The pistol demonstration had been a fluke. It had to be. "Colonel," Marcus said, his voice respectful but carrying an undertone that suggested he would not be deterred. "While we're waiting for verification, perhaps our guest wouldn't mind demonstrating some more of those impressive skills she showed us earlier." Warren frowned. "That's not necessary, Sergeant." "With respect, sir, I disagree." Marcus was already moving toward the weapons locker where several training rifles were secured behind reinforced glass. "If this woman is going to wear our uniform on our base, she should be able to handle our equipment. It's a matter of unit integrity." The logic was sound enough to make Warren hesitate. Unit integrity was indeed sacred in military culture, and Marcus's concerns, while aggressively presented, were not entirely unreasonable. Grant had already retrieved the key to the weapons locker. He unlocked the reinforced glass case and withdrew an M4 carbine, the standard rifle that every soldier on base trained with regularly. It was significantly more complex than the pistol Elena had handled, with multiple subsystems and a field stripping procedure that required both knowledge and experience to execute properly. 18 seconds, Marcus announced, consulting his watch with theatrical precision. That's the current base record for complete disassembly and reassembly, set by Master Sergeant Evans, 15 years of experience. "Think you can beat it, Princess?" The challenge was impossible. Everyone in the room knew it. Even experienced soldiers rarely broke the 22-second mark, and the idea that a civilian woman could outperform a decorated weapons instructor was absurd. But Elena approached the weapon table with measured steps, her small hands reaching for the carbine with movements that seemed almost reverent. The watching crowd pressed closer, phones recording, everyone expecting to witness the moment when the pretense would finally crumble, and this strange woman would be exposed for the fraud she clearly was. Elena lifted the M4 with both hands, checking the chamber and confirming the weapon was safe, with movements so automatic they seemed unconscious. Her fingers found the takedown pins without looking, and the familiar ritual began. Upper receiver separated from lower with a soft click. Bolt carrier group extracted with mechanical precision. Buffer spring removed without the fumbling that usually characterized amateur attempts. Each component was placed on the table in perfect order, the disassembly flowing like a carefully choreographed dance. The crowd grew quiet as they realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. Elena's hands moved with a kind of fluid certainty that spoke of thousands of repetitions, muscle memory so deeply ingrained that conscious thought was unnecessary. 8 seconds for complete disassembly. The reassembly was poetry in motion. Components flowed together as if magnetized, each part finding its proper place without hesitation or adjustment. The final takedown pin snapped home with a sound like a closing door. Elena stepped back from the fully assembled weapon. Total time, 16 seconds. A new base record. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the soft hum of the building's ventilation system. Marcus stared at the stopwatch in his hand, as if it had personally betrayed him. Rachel's face cycled through expressions of disbelief, confusion, and growing unease. Colonel Warren stepped forward, his experienced eye examining the weapon Elena had assembled. Every component was in perfect position. The action was smooth as silk when he tested it. This was not luck or memorized movements from internet videos. This was the kind of competence that came from intensive professional training. "Where did you learn to do that?" Warren asked quietly, his voice carrying a weight that suggested the answer might be more important than anyone realized. Elena's response was barely audible, delivered to the floor rather than to her questioner. "Practice, sir." But the word carried different weight now, in the context of everything they had witnessed. What kind of practice produced this level of competence? What kind of training created skills that exceeded those of career soldiers? In the corner booth, Captain Cole received an encrypted message that made his expression harden. "Preliminary analysis complete. Partial match found in classified databases. If confirmed, target is far more significant than anticipated. Maintain surveillance, but do not engage." Cole's fingers tightened around his phone. A partial match in classified databases meant Elena Mercer was not who she appeared to be. It meant she was someone important enough to have her identity protected at levels that even Shadow Protocol struggled to penetrate. For the first time since he had begun this surveillance operation, Cole felt a flicker of doubt. What if they had miscalculated? What if this woman was not the vulnerable target they had assumed? He pushed the thought aside. Shadow Protocol did not make mistakes. They had been operating in the shadows of American intelligence for decades. They had infiltrated every branch of the military, every intelligence agency, every level of government. One small woman, no matter how skilled, could not threaten what they had built. He would realize his error soon enough. Marcus sensed the situation slipping away from him. The carefully constructed narrative of superior dealing with inferior was crumbling in the face of evidence he could not explain away. But rather than backing down, he chose to escalate. "Neat trick," he said, his voice carrying a forced casualness that fooled no one. "But handling weapons is only part of being a soldier. Let's see how you do with some real military knowledge." He began firing questions in rapid succession, each one designed to expose supposed civilian ignorance. "What's the effective range of an M4 carbine?" Elena answered without hesitation. 550 meters point target, 600 meters area target. "What's the standard load for a combat medic?" "IV fluids, trauma bandages, morphine autoinjectors, quick clot hemostatic agents." "How do you call for close air support in a danger close situation?" "Authentication with higher command, precise target coordinates, and personnel accountability within the blast radius." The questions came like machine gun fire, each one technical enough to stump most civilians and many soldiers. But Elena answered them all, her responses crisp and precise, delivered with a kind of casual confidence that suggested the information was so basic it hardly required conscious thought. Her answers were not just correct. They were exhaustively complete, delivered with the kind of detail that spoke of advanced training and real-world experience. Grant decided to try a different approach, pulling out his smartphone and accessing a military database. Okay, let's try some current tactical scenarios. You're pinned down by sniper fire from an elevated position. Your squad is taking casualties. How do you respond? It was a complex scenario that required understanding of advanced tactical principles, the kind of question used in staff college examinations. Elena did not hesitate. Identify sniper position through muzzle flash and impact analysis. Deploy smoke for concealment while moving casualties to hard cover. Establish suppressive fire with squad automatic weapons to fix the sniper in position. Call for counter-sniper support or close air support depending on available assets. If neither available, coordinate flanking maneuver using available terrain while maintaining base of fire. The answer was textbook perfect, delivered with the casual confidence of someone who had faced exactly this scenario in real combat conditions. Grant found himself nodding along, recognizing the sound tactical thinking, even as he wondered where a supposed civilian could have learned such advanced concepts. Rachel Torres decided to try a different approach. She retrieved a first aid kit from behind the serving counter and presented it to Elena with a smile that did not reach her eyes. Any real soldier should know basic trauma care. Let's see how you handle a medical emergency. She selected a brutal scenario, the kind that would challenge even trained medics. Soldier takes shrapnel to the thigh, severing the femoral artery. He's conscious but losing blood fast. You've got maybe 3 minutes before he bleeds out. What do you do? It was designed to expose hesitation, maybe even revulsion from someone who had supposedly never seen real combat wounds. Instead, Elena moved with the fluid efficiency of a trauma surgeon. Her hands located the pressure points immediately, demonstrating on the training mannequin that Rachel had positioned nearby. Control bleeding with direct pressure proximal to the wound, she said, her voice steady and clinical. Apply tourniquet 2 inches above the injury site. Tighten until pulse disappears distal to the wound. Treat for shock by elevating the legs and maintaining body temperature. Establish IV access and administer fluid replacement. Prepare for emergency evacuation. As she spoke, her hands demonstrated each procedure with movements so precise they seemed choreographed. But it was the casual competence that caught everyone's attention. The way she handled the medical equipment like it was an extension of her own body. The automatic muscle memory that spoke of extensive training under pressure. Time to pulse stopped, Elena added, checking her watch. 45 seconds. Patient stabilized for transport. The performance was flawless, executed with a level of skill that would have impressed military medics with years of field experience. Rachel stared at the mannequin, then at Elena, then back at the mannequin. Her mind was struggling to process what she had just witnessed. Jake Morrison watched the proceedings with growing amazement. His initial sympathy for Elena was evolving into something approaching awe, mixed with the uncomfortable realization that he had no idea who this woman really was. The casual competence she displayed was not normal. It was the kind of skill set that belonged to elite operators, the kind of people whose very existence was classified. Marcus sensed the situation slipping away from him entirely. His carefully constructed narrative was crumbling, and he could feel his authority evaporating with each demonstration of Elena's capabilities. But rather than accepting defeat, his psychological makeup demanded escalation. If he could not prove Elena was incompetent, he would prove she was dangerous. Interesting skills for a civilian, he said, his voice taking on a harder edge. Makes me wonder where someone picks up that kind of training. Special schools, private military contractors, or maybe somewhere more unofficial? The implication was clear. He was essentially accusing Elena of being some kind of covert operative, possibly even an enemy agent. Colonel Warren felt his concern ratcheting up another notch. Sergeant, you're heading into territory that requires more than speculation. But Marcus was beyond listening to warnings. His need to maintain dominance was overriding his better judgment. Sir, with respect, we have an unidentified individual with advanced combat training on our base, carrying questionable orders and demonstrating skills that most of our own soldiers don't possess. At what point do we start asking harder questions? It was a reasonable concern delivered in the kind of aggressive tone that made it feel like an attack, and Marcus was already moving toward his next escalation. I think, he said slowly, his voice taking on a dangerous quality, it's time for a more thorough inspection. Strip search procedures. Make sure our guest isn't carrying anything that might be dangerous to base security. The words hit the mess hall like a physical blow. Warren's face darkened with anger. Sergeant, you are way out of line. Am I, sir? Marcus replied, his tone respectful, but carrying an undertone of challenge. We have an unidentified individual with advanced combat training, questionable credentials, and demonstrated weapons proficiency. At what point does prudent security override social niceness? Rachel stepped forward, sensing an opportunity. I could conduct the search, sir. Keep it professional. Make sure there are no irregularities. The offer was made with false concern, but the malicious anticipation in her eyes was unmistakable. She had been building toward this moment, the ultimate humiliation that would restore the proper order of things. Jake felt something twist in his stomach as he realized where this was heading. His grandfather's voice echoed in his memory, talking about the difference between following orders and doing what was right. Sir, this isn't necessary, Jake said. She's cooperated with everything we've asked. Marcus turned on him with barely contained fury. Private Morrison, you seem to have strong opinions about how we should handle security procedures. Maybe you'd like to explain to the colonel why you think protocol should be ignored. It was a direct challenge to Jake's military career, delivered with calculated precision. Follow orders and watch an innocent woman be humiliated, or stand up for what was right and face the consequences. Warren felt the situation spiraling beyond his control. His command authority was being undermined by Marcus's aggressive interpretation of security protocols. The technical justifications were sound enough to provide cover, but the malicious intent was clear to anyone with eyes. But before Warren could intervene, before anyone could stop what was happening, Elena's voice cut through the tension with unexpected clarity. It's fine. The words were spoken with such calm acceptance that they seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Elena's posture remained submissive, but something in her tone suggested this capitulation was not defeat. It was a choice. If Sergeant Hayes believes a search is necessary for base security, I'll comply. Marcus's face lit up with predatory satisfaction, interpreting her compliance as final victory. Outstanding. Lieutenant Torres, conduct the search. Make it thorough. But Jake noticed something the others missed. As Elena's hands moved to the buttons of her oversized uniform jacket, her breathing changed. The rapid, shallow breaths of fear had been replaced by something else entirely. The measured, controlled breathing patterns used in combat situations to maintain heart rate and ensure optimal performance under stress. She was not afraid. She had never been afraid. Elena's jacket fell away, leaving her standing in the fitted gray t-shirt that emphasized both her delicate build and the unexpected definition of muscles that spoke of intensive training. The fabric clung to a body that had been honed for purposes that civilian life could not explain. Now the shirt, Marcus ordered, his voice thick with anticipation. Elena's hands moved to the hem of her gray t-shirt. Her movements were calm and deliberate despite the hostile attention focused on her. Around the mess hall, conversations had stopped entirely. The usual Friday evening chaos had been replaced by the tense anticipation that precedes revelation. Warren felt his unease crystallizing into genuine alarm as he watched Elena's complete lack of fear or embarrassment. In his experience, Innocent civilians faced with public humiliation displayed predictable reactions: tears, anger, desperate attempts to preserve dignity. Elena displayed none of these. Instead, there was something in her posture, in the way she held herself, that reminded Warren of elite operators he had encountered in classified briefings. It was the kind of deadly calm that came from absolute confidence in one's own capabilities. Elena's hands gripped the hem of her t-shirt, and the entire mess hall held its breath. She began to lift. The gray fabric rose, revealing first the toned muscles of her abdomen, then the defined lines of someone whose physical conditioning went far beyond civilian fitness standards. But it was what lay beyond, hidden beneath the fabric, that would transform every assumption in the room. As the shirt cleared her lower back, the first details began to emerge. Intricate black lines that spoke of professional artistry. Hours spent under the needle. Something deliberate, something meaningful, something that was part art, part declaration, part warning. The room held its breath as more of the tattoo became visible. It was not just any tattoo. It was a masterpiece of black ink that seemed to absorb light itself. Two massive dragons, one dark as midnight, one gleaming like polished bone. Their serpentine bodies were intertwined in perfect yin-yang symmetry across her entire back. The artistry was breathtaking. Each scale was individually detailed. Each claw was sharp enough to seem real. Each eye burned with an intensity that made the artwork seem alive. But it was the flames that truly captured attention. Intricate tongues of fire surrounded the dragons, each flame rendered with such precision that they seemed to dance and flicker in the fluorescent lighting. The entire design covered Elena's back from shoulder blade to shoulder blade, from the base of her neck to her lower spine. A canvas of skin transformed into something that spoke of power, balance, and deadly purpose. Complete silence descended on the mess hall, the kind of silence that comes when the world shifts on its axis and everyone present knows they are witnessing something that will change everything. Jake Morrison was the first to break it. His voice was barely a whisper. "Holy, that's the dragon balance." The words hit the room like a thunderclap. Every soldier with advanced training knew what Jake had just identified. The dragon balance was legend. It was myth. It was the kind of story told in hushed voices in classified briefings. Only 12 people alive were authorized to wear that marking, and each one represented the absolute pinnacle of military special operations. Colonel David Warren's reaction was instantaneous and decisive. He snapped to full military attention, his hand rising in a crisp salute that belonged in ceremonial reviews. His weathered face had gone pale, but his voice carried the weight of absolute recognition. "Lieutenant Elena Mercer, call sign Ghost Dragon, Navy SEAL Team 6. The formal identification landed like a mortar round in the stunned silence. Marcus Hayes collapsed. There was no other word for it. His legs gave out, and he staggered backward into a chair that barely caught him. The confident predator who had dominated this room for years was gone, replaced by a man watching his entire world crumble. He had just ordered a Navy SEAL Team 6 operator to strip. He had humiliated someone whose service record included operations that had literally shaped the course of international conflicts. His hands shook as the full weight of that realization crashed down on him like a collapsing building. Rachel Torres's phone slipped from nerveless fingers, clattering on the concrete floor with a sound like breaking bones. Grant Sullivan took 3 steps backward, his hands rising involuntarily as if in surrender. The reaction spread through the mess hall like ripples from a stone dropped in still water. "The dragon balance," someone whispered from the back of the crowd. "Only 12 people alive have that marking." "Ghost Dragon," another voice breathed. "The phantom who saved Echo Company in Afghanistan." The recognition spread like wildfire. Elena Mercer was not just any Navy SEAL. She was legend-made flesh, one of the most decorated and feared special operators in military history. The woman they had been mocking, the civilian they had been humiliating. She was someone whose very existence was classified at levels that made most of their security clearances look like kindergarten hall passes. Grant struggled to retrieve his thoughts, his mind racing to process what he was witnessing. The video he and others had been recording would never see the light of day. Filming a classified operator was a federal offense that could result in charges severe enough to end careers permanently. Jake felt a mixture of vindication and awe. His instincts had been right. This woman was someone special, someone who deserved respect. But the scale of what he had witnessed was beyond his comprehension. Warren maintained his salute, his military bearing absolute despite the chaos around him. "Ma'am, I apologize for the circumstances of this revelation." Elena lowered her t-shirt with the same calm precision she had used for everything else. The dragon balance disappeared beneath the gray fabric, but the knowledge of its presence remained burned into every mind in the room. When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of someone accustomed to command, to life or death decisions, to operations that existed in the shadows between peace and war. "At ease, Colonel. You couldn't have known, that was the point." She turned to face the room, her eyes sweeping across the assembled soldiers with an intensity that made several of them take involuntary steps backward. "My orders were to observe and assess base security protocols under deep cover. Sergeant Hayes's behavior has provided extensive data." The implications were staggering. This had not been a case of mistaken identity or accidental humiliation. Elena Mercer had been here intentionally, testing the base's personnel, evaluating their character and judgment under stress. Every insult, every cruel laugh, every moment of mockery had been documented and assessed by someone whose recommendations could reshape military careers. Would it have mattered? Elena's question cut through the noise of desperate apologies and whispered fears. Should respect be conditional on rank or reputation? Should basic human dignity depend on someone's ability to fight back? The questions hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield, unanswerable because everyone present knew the truth. Their behavior had revealed exactly who they were when they thought there would be no consequences. The fluorescent lights in the mess hall flickered once, twice, then died completely, plunging the space into darkness, broken only by the emergency lights that automatically activated along the baseboards. In the sudden darkness, Elena's voice cut through with calm authority. "Everyone remain exactly where you are. Do not move. Do not speak. Do not activate any electronic devices." Her command was delivered with such absolute confidence that even Marcus, lost in his psychological breakdown, froze in place. Jake felt his instincts surge to life. Every nerve ending was screaming that they were in mortal danger, but he could not identify the source. In the darkness, Elena moved like liquid shadow. Her position shifted so silently that even those standing nearby could not track her movements. When she spoke again, her voice came from a completely different location. "Private Morrison, you're going to be my communication relay. On my signal, you'll contact base security and provide the authentication code I'm about to give you." Jake's throat was dry, but his voice remained steady. "Yes, ma'am. Tango 77 Echo. Tell them Ghost Dragon is active and requesting immediate tactical support for hostile extraction." The authentication code meant nothing to Jake, but he committed it to memory with the kind of focus that combat situations demanded. Elena's tablet glowed softly as she accessed systems that did not appear on any organizational chart. The screen showed heat signatures moving around the base perimeter, tactical formations that spoke of professional military training. "How many?" Warren whispered, having moved to a position where he could see the tactical display. 12 confirmed, Elena replied. "Possibly more in reserve positions. They're moving to secure the communication center in the command post. Shadow protocol, Warren breathed, recognizing the tactical signatures from classified briefings he had attended years ago. Correct, Elena confirmed. A rogue intelligence unit operating without oversight or accountability. They've been monitoring your communications, documenting your security procedures, and identifying exploitable personnel for potential recruitment. She gestured toward the corner booth where Captain Cole had been sitting. Captain Cole is one of their senior field operatives. He's been running surveillance on Fort Ridgeway for 3 months, documenting everything that passes through the communication center. In the darkness near the emergency exit, Cole's hand moved toward his concealed weapon, instinct overriding logic. But before his fingers could close around the grip, he felt cold steel press against the back of his skull. Don't! The voice belonged to one of Elena's tactical team members who had infiltrated the mess hall during the confusion. Cole had not even heard him approach. 3 months, Cole said quietly, his hands rising slowly in surrender. 3 months I watched you, documented everything, reported every detail. Elena walked toward him, her footsteps deliberate in the emergency lighting. And for 3 months I watched you watching me. Every dead drop you used, every handler you contacted, every piece of intelligence you transmitted. She stopped directly in front of him, close enough that he could see the cold calculation in her eyes. You thought you were hunting me, Captain Cole, but I've been hunting Shadow Protocol since before you even knew my name existed. Cole's shoulders sagged. The fight went out of him like air from a punctured tire. How long have you known? Since the day you arrived at Fort Ridgeway. Your cover was good, your tradecraft was excellent, but you made one mistake. What mistake? Elena leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that only he could hear. You looked at me like prey. Real intelligence officers know better than to underestimate anyone. She stepped back and nodded to her team. Take him. As Cole was escorted toward the exit, Elena turned back to address the room. Shadow Protocol has been running a surveillance operation on Fort Ridgeway for 3 months. They've been identifying security vulnerabilities and gathering intelligence for sale to foreign adversaries. She pulled up additional data on her tablet, showing the scope of the infiltration. But that's not why I'm here. Shadow Protocol made a mistake 3 years ago. They targeted Dragon Balance operatives for elimination, thinking we were too dangerous to leave operational. Her smile was cold enough to freeze the air around her. They were right about the dangerous part. They were wrong about thinking they could hunt us. The implications settled over the room like a shroud. Elena had not stumbled into Shadow Protocol's surveillance operation. She had allowed herself to be surveilled. She had fed them information. She had led them exactly where she wanted them to go. The humiliation she had endured, the mockery she had absorbed. It had all been part of a larger strategy that was only now becoming clear. You used yourself as bait, Warren said quietly. For 3 months, Elena confirmed. Shadow Protocol couldn't resist the opportunity to surveil someone they believed was isolated and vulnerable. They thought they were gathering intelligence on me. They didn't realize I was gathering intelligence on them. Her tablet chimed with an incoming priority message. Elena read it, and for the first time since the revelation of her identity, her expression shifted. Something flickered across her face that might have been concern. Ma'am, Jake asked, noticing the change. Elena's jaw tightened as she read the message again. Then she looked up, her eyes finding Marcus Hayes where he still sat slumped in his chair. Sergeant Hayes, I need your attention. Marcus looked up, his face a mask of despair and self-recrimination. Ma'am, Shadow Protocol just sent me a message. They have my sister. They're demanding I surrender myself in exchange for her release. The words hung in the air. Everyone in the room understood what was happening. Shadow Protocol was trying to use Elena's family as leverage, to turn her strength into a weakness that could defeat her. But it was Marcus who spoke next, and his words surprised everyone. Ma'am, with respect, that's exactly what they expect you to do. Elena turned to look at him, her expression unreadable. Explain. Marcus rose from his chair, his posture straightening despite the weight of his earlier humiliation. They're using psychological leverage, the same kind of manipulation I used against others tonight. His voice was heavy with self-recognition. Exploit someone's vulnerabilities. Make them feel powerless. Force them into choices that serve your interests rather than theirs. He met Elena's eyes with something approaching genuine respect. They're counting on your emotional response overriding your tactical judgment. They want you to react, not think. Rachel Torres, standing nearby, found herself nodding despite her earlier hostility. It's manipulation at the strategic level. They're trying to turn your strength into a weakness. Jake stepped forward, pieces clicking together in his mind. But if we understand their psychological strategy, we can counter it. Instead of reacting emotionally, we respond tactically. Elena watched the three of them, seeing something she had not expected. Growth, understanding, the beginning of transformation. "What do you recommend?" she asked, genuinely curious to hear their analysis. Marcus took a deep breath. "Give them what they expect, your emotional surrender, while delivering what they don't expect, a tactical surprise." "They'll expect you to come alone and unarmed," Grant added, his weapons expertise adding practical considerations. "They won't expect coordinated backup position for assault." "The Dragon Balance Network," Rachel said suddenly. "Your sister isn't the only operator in the field, is she? There are others who can coordinate rescue operations while you provide distraction." Elena's smile returned, sharp as a blade and cold as winter. "Outstanding analysis, but you're missing one crucial element of the tactical picture." She held up her tablet, showing them the message she had received. The photograph of her sister, bound and unconscious. The demands for surrender, the threats of execution. "My sister doesn't need rescuing. She's conducting her own counter-operation." The revelation recontextualized everything they thought they understood about the situation. The photograph, the demands, the threats of execution. It's all theater. Sophia placed herself in position to be captured at the exact moment when it would provide maximum tactical advantage. Warren shook his head in amazement. She allowed herself to be captured? "She positioned herself to be captured," Elena corrected. "There's a significant difference." Elena allowed herself a moment to explain. Sophia had been undercover in Shadow Protocol's European headquarters for 18 months. 18 months of pretending to be someone she was not. 18 months of gaining the trust of people she would eventually destroy. The capture had been the final act. Sophia had allowed Shadow Protocol to take her, knowing they would bring her directly to their leadership for interrogation. And once inside their most secure facility, she had done what Dragon Balance operators did best. She had become the nightmare they never saw coming. As if summoned by her words, Elena's encrypted communication device chimed with an incoming priority message from halfway around the world. The text was brief but decisive. "Package delivered. Network terminated. Coming home. Love you, sis." The message was accompanied by photographic evidence that made even the skeptics in the room fall silent. Images of Shadow Protocol's leadership in custody, financial networks frozen, communications systems dismantled, safe houses compromised. The photographs showed the aftermath. Shadow Protocol's command center in ruins, their servers seized, their leadership in handcuffs. All because they had underestimated a woman they thought was their prisoner. "Your sister is terrifying," Warren said quietly, looking at the images. Elena's smile carried genuine warmth for the first time all evening. "She learned from the best. Our father taught us both." The organization that had threatened global security had been systematically destroyed by two women working in perfect coordination across continents. "How long have you two been planning this?" Warren asked quietly. 3 years, Elena replied. "Ever since Shadow Protocol made the mistake of targeting Dragon Balance operatives for elimination. They thought they were hunting us. We've been hunting them." The tactical team that had been positioned around the base perimeter began entering the mess hall. Figures in full tactical gear moved with the fluid precision of elite operators, their movements coordinated to the point of seeming choreographed. "Ghost Dragon, status report," the team leader called out. "Area secure, casualties nil, witnesses protected, primary target in custody." She gestured toward Cole, who was being escorted toward the exit by two operators who handled him with professional efficiency. Shadow protocol assets secured, surveillance network dismantled, communication intercepts processed, elimination teams neutralized. The efficiency of the operation was staggering. In less than an hour, an international intelligence network had been identified, infiltrated, and destroyed by forces that operated so far off the official books that their very existence was deniable. Warren watched the proceedings with the kind of professional appreciation that came from decades of military service. This wasn't just about assessing Fort Ridgeway, was it? "No, Colonel," Elena confirmed. "This was about protecting the nation from threats that conventional forces couldn't even identify. Cultural rot, toxic leadership, systematic abuse. These create vulnerabilities that hostile forces can exploit." She looked around the mess hall, taking in the faces of soldiers who had mocked her, humiliated her, and threatened her with violation. Shadow Protocol recruited their sources from among military personnel who felt abandoned by their leadership, people who believed they had been treated unfairly by the system they had sworn to serve. Every person who feels powerless, who believes the system is rigged against them, becomes a potential asset for hostile forces. The weight of her words settled over the room like a physical presence. "That's why the assessment was so important," Jake said quietly. "Not just to identify bad leaders, but to identify potential security risks before they could be exploited. And to identify good leaders," Elena added, her gaze moving to Jake with approval. "People who will stand up for what's right, who will protect others, who understand that true strength comes from service rather than domination." She turned to face Marcus Hayes, who stood at attention with the rigid bearing of someone awaiting judgment. "Sergeant First Class Marcus Hayes, your behavior during this assessment has demonstrated significant leadership failures, psychological issues, and judgment deficiencies that require immediate corrective action." Marcus remained at attention, his gaze fixed on a point above Elena's head as military protocol demanded, but the slight tremor in his hands betrayed the storm of emotions beneath. Under normal circumstances, these failures would result in immediate disciplinary action, potential discharge, and the end of your military career. Rachel glanced at Marcus, expecting to see devastation on his face. Instead, she saw something unexpected: acceptance. Not defeat, but the calm recognition of someone facing the consequences of his actions. However, Elena's voice softened slightly. "Your insights during the crisis and your willingness to acknowledge your failures suggest capacity for growth and rehabilitation." For the first time since she began speaking, a flicker of hope crossed Marcus's face, quickly suppressed as he maintained his disciplined posture. "Therefore, you are hereby reduced in rank to Private First Class, effective immediately. You will report to the Psychological Operations Division at Fort Bragg in 72 hours for intensive evaluation and specialized training in ethical leadership, trauma response, and psychological warfare defense." The sentence was harsh, but it offered a path to redemption, a chance to rebuild himself into someone worthy of the uniform he wore. "Thank you, ma'am," Marcus said, his voice rough with emotion. "I won't squander this opportunity." Elena's gaze was penetrating as she studied his face, looking beyond his words to the truth beneath. Whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy her. "See that you don't, Hayes, because I'll be watching." She turned to Rachel Torres, who straightened automatically under that intense blue gaze. "Lieutenant Torres, your participation in systematic harassment, your willingness to use your position to humiliate a perceived inferior, and your failure to uphold the standards expected of an officer will result in formal reprimand and demotion to second lieutenant. Rachel paled but nodded acceptance. Like Marcus, she understood that she was being offered a second chance that many in her position would not have received. You will also complete specialized training in ethical leadership, with particular focus on mentorship and the responsibility of female officers to create environments that elevate rather than undermine other women in the service. The specific nature of the training cut to the heart of Rachel's failures. Yes, ma'am, I understand. Do you? Elena's question was sharp, demanding absolute honesty. Or are you simply saying what you believe I want to hear? Rachel hesitated, then took a deep breath. 3 hours ago, I would have been saying what I thought you wanted to hear. Now, now I genuinely want to be better than I was today. Elena studied her for a long moment, then nodded. That's a start, Lieutenant. Make sure your actions match your words going forward. Grant Sullivan straightened as Elena turned toward him, anticipating his own judgment. Corporal Sullivan, your technical competence is noted and valued. However, your willingness to participate in group harassment rather than demonstrate moral courage is concerning. You will undergo additional training in ethical leadership and decision-making under peer pressure before being considered for future advancement. Grant nodded, relief evident in his posture. His punishment was less severe than the others, reflecting his more limited role in the evening's events. Finally, Elena turned to Jake Morrison, her expression warming noticeably. Private Morrison, Jake came to attention, his heart pounding in his chest. Your moral courage in standing up for what's right, despite significant pressure to conform, demonstrates exactly the kind of character this military needs. She paused, letting her words sink in. You are hereby recommended for accelerated advancement and specialized leadership training. Effective immediately. Jake blinked in surprise. Ma'am, I just did what my grandfather would have expected of me. That's exactly the point, Private. True character isn't what you do when everyone is watching and approving. It's what you do when standing alone would be easier. Your grandfather taught you well. She reached into her tactical vest and produced a small medallion bearing the dragon balance symbol. Two intertwined dragons, one dark, one light, surrounded by flames. Not all warriors bear the mark on their skin, Elena said, placing the medallion in Jake's palm. Some carry it in their hearts. The dragon balance isn't just a tattoo, it's a promise. To stand between light and shadow, to fight not just with weapons, but with moral courage. Jake looked down at the medallion, feeling the weight of its significance. You've earned your place in our ranks, Sergeant Morrison. The promotion landed like a thunderbolt. Jake's head snapped up, his eyes wide with disbelief. Ma'am, the paperwork will be processed by morning. Report to Colonel Warren for your new assignment details. Elena's smile carried warmth that had been absent throughout the evening's confrontation. See you in Alaska. She turned to address the entire mess hall one final time. What happened here tonight wasn't just about exposing shadow protocol or testing individual soldiers. It was about identifying the cultural weaknesses that allowed infiltration in the first place. Her voice carried to every corner of the space. The Ghost Dragon protocols that Colonel Warren will be implementing aren't just about new security measures or different reporting structures. They're about transforming the fundamental culture of military service. Warren nodded, accepting the responsibility being placed on his shoulders. A military organization built on fear, intimidation, and toxic power dynamics will always be vulnerable to exploitation, Elena continued, not just by formal adversaries like Shadow Protocol, but by the kind of internal rot that destroys effectiveness from within. She looked around the room one final time, her gaze touching each face in turn. The transformation won't be easy. It will require confronting uncomfortable truths about how we train, how we lead, and how we define strength. but it is essential for the future security of this nation. The tactical team had completed their work. Shadow protocol operatives were in custody. Evidence had been secured. Communication networks had been dismantled. Elena Mercer, Ghost Dragon, had accomplished her mission. Colonel Warren will oversee the immediate implementation phase, she announced. Within 48 hours, every soldier on this base will begin specialized training in the new protocols. Within 30 days, Fort Ridgeway will become the center for testing these new approaches before they are deployed across all branches of the armed services. She began walking toward the exit, her tactical team falling into formation around her. But before she reached the door, she paused and looked back at the room full of soldiers who had witnessed something they would never forget. Every person you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. The uniform doesn't make the soldier. Character does, and character is revealed not in moments of comfort, but in moments of choice. Her final words echoed in the silence. Remember that. And then she was gone, disappearing into the Texas night with the same quiet efficiency with which she had arrived. Fort Ridgeway had become unrecognizable to anyone who had known it before the night of Elena Mercer's revelation. Physical changes were immediately apparent. New security systems monitored every entrance. Training facilities had been reorganized around the Ghost Dragon protocols. Command structures had been rebuilt to emphasize accountability and ethical leadership. But the most profound transformations were less visible. Marcus Hayes, now Private First Class Hayes, stood before a group of 30 soldiers in the base's newly established Ethical Leadership Center. His face was thinner than it had been 3 months ago. The arrogance that had defined him was gone, replaced by a quiet intensity that spoke of hard-won wisdom. 3 months ago, I stood in the mess hall and demonstrated everything a military leader shouldn't be, he began, his voice carrying the weight of personal experience. I used my rank and physical presence to intimidate. I confused dominance with leadership. I created an environment where cruelty was rewarded and moral courage was punished. The soldiers watching him remained silent. What I didn't understand then, what the Ghost Dragon program forced me to confront, was that my behavior wasn't just morally wrong, it was strategically dangerous. I was creating exactly the kind of cultural vulnerability that our adversaries exploit to compromise our security from within. He gestured to the wall behind him, where the dragon balance symbol had been incorporated into the new Fort Ridgeway insignia. The past 3 months have been the most challenging of my life. Intensive psychological evaluation, confronting the trauma that shaped my need for control, learning the difference between strength and force, between leadership and dominance. His gaze moved across the assembled soldiers. I'm not standing here as a success story. I'm standing here as a work in progress, as living proof that transformation is possible if we're willing to confront our failures honestly and commit to becoming better than we were. Across the base, similar scenes were playing out as the Ghost Dragon protocols took root. Rachel Torres was leading specialized training for female officers, focusing on building supportive mentorship networks rather than competitive hierarchies. The woman who had once used her position to tear down other women was now dedicated to lifting them up. Grant Sullivan had discovered a talent for technical instruction, using his expertise to ensure that soldiers mastered their equipment without resorting to intimidation or mockery. And Jake Morrison, now Sergeant Morrison, the youngest soldier to receive battlefield promotion in Fort Ridgeway's history, was preparing for his next assignment. Colonel Warren sat in his office, the latest reports from other installations implementing Ghost Dragon protocols displayed on his monitors. The results were promising: significant improvements in unit cohesion, dramatic reductions in security incidents, unprecedented levels of reporting on potential vulnerabilities. A soft chime from his computer announced an incoming secure communication. The sender identification made him sit up straighter. Dragon Alpha, Elena Mercer herself. The message was brief but meaningful. Phase 3 Progress Evaluation Exemplary. Continuing to monitor. Tell Morrison to pack for cold weather. His next assignment begins in 72 hours. Warren smiled. Jake's journey was just beginning. Another piece in the expansive strategy that Elena Mercer and her Dragon Balance operators were implementing across the globe. As if summoned by his thoughts, there was a knock at his door. "Come in." Jake entered, his posture reflecting the confidence that 3 months of intensive training had built. "You wanted to see me, sir?" "Yes, Sergeant. I have news about your next assignment." Jake straightened, his expression betraying both excitement and apprehension. "Ghost Dragon program, sir?" "That's classified, Sergeant." Warren allowed himself a small smile. "But I can tell you to pack for cold weather. You're shipping out in 72 hours. May I ask where I'm going?" "Sir." "You may ask, but I can't tell you. What I can say is that Lieutenant Mercer specifically requested you for this assignment." The significance of that statement was not lost on Jake. "She requested me personally?" "She did. And based on what I've seen over the past 3 months, I understand why. You've demonstrated exactly the qualities the new protocols are designed to develop. Technical competence combined with moral courage, adaptability, the willingness to stand alone for what's right." Warren rose from behind his desk, extending his hand to the young sergeant in a gesture of respect between equals rather than the formal acknowledgement of rank. "Whatever they're sending you to do, Morrison, I have no doubt you'll make Fort Ridgeway proud." Jake accepted the handshake, his grip firm but not aggressive. One of many subtle changes that had spread throughout the base since the implementation of Ghost Dragon protocols. "Thank you, sir. I'll do my best." As Jake turned to leave, Warren called after him. "Oh, and Sergeant, Lieutenant Mercer left something for you. It's in the envelope on your bunk." Jake found the envelope exactly where Warren had said it would be. Inside was a handwritten note on paper that bore no official markings or identifiers. "Morrison, 3 months ago, you stood up when everyone else sat down. You spoke when everyone else stayed silent. You chose honor over comfort, duty over self-preservation. That's what the Dragon Balance is really about. Not the tattoo, not the training, not the operations that will never appear in any official record. It's about being the person who does what's right, when doing what's right costs everything. The medallion I gave you isn't a symbol, it's a promise that you will stand between light and shadow, that you will fight not just with weapons but with moral courage, that you will be the voice that speaks for those who cannot speak for themselves." Your grandfather understood this. He lived it at Iwo Jima and every day afterward. He passed that understanding to you, and now you will pass it to others. The world is full of people like Marcus Hayes was, full of systems that reward cruelty and punish courage, full of organizations that rot from within while presenting perfect facades to the outside world. Our job is to find that rot, to expose it, to transform it, and sometimes to eliminate it. It's not easy work. It's not safe work. It's not work that anyone will ever thank you for or even know about. But it's necessary work, and you've proven you're ready for it. Pack warm. Alaska gets cold this time of year. See you soon. EM. Jake read the letter 3 times, committing every word to memory. Then he carefully folded it and placed it in his pocket, next to the medallion that had not left his person since the night Elena had given it to him. He looked around his barracks room one final time. In 72 hours, he would leave Fort Ridgeway behind. He would step into a world of shadows and secrets, of missions that officially never happened, and operators who technically did not exist. He was not afraid. His grandfather's voice echoed in his memory, as clear as if the old man were standing beside him. "You'll know you've become the man you're supposed to be, son, when you stop asking what you'll gain and start asking what you can give." Jake Morrison understood now what those words really meant, and he was ready to spend the rest of his life living up to them. Across the world in a location that appeared on no map, and existed in no official record, Elena Mercer reviewed the final reports from Operation Dragon's Awakening. Fort Ridgeway was just one of 17 installations that had undergone Ghost Dragon assessment in the past year. Shadow Protocol had been dismantled. Their leadership was in custody. Their networks had been destroyed. But the real victory was not in the arrests or the intelligence recovered. The real victory was in the transformation. 17 bases, thousands of soldiers, countless potential security vulnerabilities identified and addressed. A new generation of leaders emerging who understood that strength came from character, not intimidation. Elena set down the reports and walked to the window of her temporary quarters. Outside, the Alaskan wilderness stretched endlessly in every direction. Snow-covered mountains rose against a sky that seemed impossibly large. Somewhere out there, her sister Sophia was completing her own debriefing after 18 months undercover. Their coordinated operation had taken 3 years of planning and cost more than either of them liked to remember, but it was worth it. The door behind her opened, and she turned to see the face of her commanding officer, a man whose name she had never learned and whose rank existed outside normal military structure. Dragon Alpha, he said simply. New assignment. Elena nodded. She had expected this. The work was never finished. There was always another threat, another infiltration, another system rotting from within while presenting a perfect facade to the outside world. Where? Classified until you're in transit. But I can tell you this, you're not going alone. The man stepped aside and a familiar figure appeared in the doorway. Jake Morrison stood at attention, his new sergeant stripes gleaming on his uniform. The medallion Elena had given him hung from a chain around his neck, visible beneath his collar. Sergeant Morrison reporting for duty, ma'am. Elena allowed herself a rare smile, a genuine one, untainted by the mask she wore for most of the world. At ease, Sergeant. Welcome to the Ghost Dragon program. She walked over to him, studying his face for any sign of doubt or hesitation. She found none. Do you understand what you're getting into? The missions we run don't officially exist. The enemies we fight don't appear in any intelligence briefing. The victories we achieve will never be acknowledged, and the sacrifices we make will never be honored. Jake met her eyes without flinching. My grandfather spent 50 years carrying memories of Iwo Jima that he could never share with anyone except other Marines who had been there. He did it because some things are more important than recognition. Some things are worth doing simply because they need to be done. Elena nodded slowly. Your grandfather was a wise man. Yes, ma'am, he was. She turned back to the window, looking out at the endless wilderness that stretched before them. Then let's get to work, Sergeant. We have a world to protect. Jake moved to stand beside her, his own gaze fixed on the horizon. He touched the medallion beneath his collar, feeling the raised edges of the intertwined dragons. Yes, ma'am, we do. And somewhere in the distance, a shadow moved across the snow. A reminder that in the spaces between light and darkness, the dragon balance kept watch. Always.